Nathan Caldwell thought he had carefully orchestrated every detail. But when a simple text message from his wife, Emma, ignites a chain of events no one could have predicted, Detective Lauren Price uncovers a conspiracy far darker than anyone imagined. Emma's tragic end isn't the only secret Nathan is hiding. There are others who have played a sinister role, and as the truth unravels, it will change everything Claire Caldwell thought she knew about her sister's life and death. It was a cool, gray Tuesday morning in the small, peaceful town of Brooksville, the kind of place where people rarely locked their doors and neighbors still waved to one another from across the street. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a dull glow over the wet pavement from the rain the night before. Children were getting ready for school, sprinklers were humming in quiet front yards, and the hum of morning routines filled the air. Everything about the morning felt ordinary, at least for most of Brooksville. By 8:30 a.m., Emma Caldwell's absence was already raising concern. Her sister Claire, who lived just 20 minutes away, had tried calling her several times. They spoke every morning before work, like clockwork. When her calls went unanswered, Claire assumed Emma was running late or had her phone on silent. But the worry slowly crept in. It wasn't like Emma to break routine. She was steady, predictable, and responsible to a fault. After the fifth unanswered call and 2 unread messages, Claire decided to drive over to Emma's house. The Caldwells lived on a quiet cul-de-sac at the edge of town, in a 2-story blue and white home that always looked clean and well kept. Emma had worked as the librarian at Brooksville Elementary for almost 10 years, and she was beloved by both her colleagues and students. She was known for her warm smile, tidy desk, and the way she always wore a different scarf each day during the winter. Her life seemed as organized and peaceful as the library she managed. When Claire pulled into the driveway just before 9 a.m., she immediately noticed Emma's car parked where it always was. Her heart began to race. She knocked on the front door several times, then rang the bell. No answer. She tried peeking through the window, but the curtains were drawn. Eventually, Claire walked around to the back, hoping to find her sister in the garden. Emma loved to water her roses early in the morning, often before changing for work. But the garden was empty. Everything was still. Panic finally took hold. Claire called 911 and reported her sister missing. Police arrived quickly. The first officer on the scene found no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, and no items disturbed. Emma's purse was not in the house. Her keys and phone were missing, but nothing else looked out of place. Her laptop sat open on the dining table, a half-empty cup of tea beside it. The living room was tidy, the bedroom neat, and the bathroom towels were still damp, as if recently used. There was no blood, no struggle, no clear clue as to where she might have gone. Her husband, Nathan Caldwell, returned home around 10:15 a.m. after being contacted at work. He looked confused, tired, and deeply concerned. According to him, Emma had left the house around 6:30 that morning to go for a walk, something she did occasionally to clear her head. He said she'd been feeling stressed lately and needed fresh air. She told him she'd be back soon. When asked why he hadn't been worried earlier, Nathan claimed he assumed she'd gone to work directly from the walk and had simply forgotten to text. Police found it strange that he hadn't tried calling or texting Emma that morning, especially since her car was still in the driveway. When asked about this, Nathan said they'd had a small disagreement the night before, and he thought she just needed space. Officers conducted a search of the neighborhood. No one had seen Emma leave the house that morning. A few neighbors remembered hearing a dog bark around dawn, and one woman said she thought she heard a car door slam around 6:45 a.m., but nothing more. The Caldwells didn't own a dog, and the details were too vague to lead anywhere. Later that afternoon, detectives began canvassing nearby security cameras, doorbell footage, store parking lots, traffic lights, but found no trace of Emma. No one matching her description had been seen walking, driving, or entering any businesses in the area that morning. As night fell, a growing sense of unease settled over Brooksville. Emma Caldwell wasn't the type of person to disappear. She didn't live a risky life. She didn't drink heavily. She didn't have enemies, and she didn't keep secrets, or at least that's what everyone thought. Back at the house, a detective examined Emma's laptop. A browser tab showed an open school newsletter draft. Another had a recipe for lemon bars. Nothing looked suspicious at first glance. But Emma's phone records were more puzzling. Her last outgoing message was to Nathan at 7:15 a.m. It simply read, "Don't come looking for me. I need time. Please respect this." The wording struck investigators as odd. It didn't sound like a woman simply taking a walk or clearing her head. It sounded like someone leaving on purpose, or someone trying to make it sound that way. That night, Claire stayed with her parents. None of them slept. Flyers were printed, her picture was shared on local news, and volunteers formed search parties. Still, no new information came in. By the end of the first 24 hours, Emma Caldwell had vanished without a trace. No witnesses. No evidence of foul play. Just a husband's strange explanation, a missing woman, and a text message that didn't quite make sense. The town that had felt so safe now felt different. People locked their doors. They watched their neighbors more closely. And the question lingered in everyone's mind. Where was Emma, and why had she sent that message? As the investigation began in earnest, detectives couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Nothing about the scene was chaotic. Nothing was stolen. It was as if Emma had simply vanished into thin air. But things don't just disappear. And people don't send messages like that unless someone wants them to. The message came to Nathan Caldwell's phone at exactly 7:15 a.m., just 45 minutes after he said his wife, Emma, had left the house for her early morning walk. It was short, strange, and unlike anything she had ever written to him before. "Don't come looking for me. I need time. Please respect this." Nathan told the police that when he read the message, he was confused but not alarmed. According to him, Emma had been distant lately, moody, distracted, quiet at times. He chalked it up to work stress, or perhaps some unspoken tension between them. He thought she might be taking a break, maybe going to a friend's house, or just driving around to cool off. He said he didn't reply because he wanted to give her space. But to investigators, the message felt immediately off. They had spoken to Emma's friends and family, all of whom described her as thoughtful and precise. She never sent abrupt messages. She preferred phone calls over texts and always explained herself in detail, especially when it came to something serious. Claire, her sister, said Emma had never once used the phrase, "I need time," in any conversation, and she wouldn't have left without checking in with someone. Investigators asked to see Nathan's phone. He willingly handed it over, saying he had nothing to hide. The message was still there, time-stamped and clean. No reply from him. No follow-up messages from Emma. Just that single final line that seemed to shut everything down. They started, comparing Emma's past text messages with the one that morning. With permission from Claire, detectives accessed some of Emma's older texts from a group chat she shared with her sister and two close friends. They noticed distinct patterns. Emma's texts usually had punctuation, emojis, and personal touches. She used contractions like "I'm" instead of "I am, and she rarely wrote in stiff or formal language. The message Nathan received didn't match. It was too clipped, too neutral, and too generic. Police requested Emma's phone records from the service provider. What they found made them pause. The message had been sent from Emma's phone, yes, but the phone had pinged off a tower near the Caldwell house. If she had gone for a walk and kept walking, her phone should have connected with different towers. But there had been no movement. It was as if the phone hadn't gone anywhere after Nathan said she left the house. They also checked the cell tower logs to trace the device's activity before and after 7:15 a.m. There were no calls, no other messages. Emma's phone had been idle until that single message. Then it went dark. No activity at all. It was powered off or destroyed shortly after the message was sent. This deepened the mystery. If Emma had truly left on her own, why would she turn off her phone? And why would she leave behind her car, wallet, and everything else she normally took with her? If she needed space, why didn't she tell her sister, her closest confidant, anything at all? A digital forensics expert was brought in to analyze Nathan's phone and computer. While the phone looked clean, investigators noted that he had deleted some browser history from the morning Emma vanished. When recovered, it showed he had visited websites about delayed text messaging and timestamp manipulation. These were not things an average person casually searched for. He had also viewed a forum post about staging disappearances. That thread had been bookmarked. Detectives quietly began looking at Nathan differently. On the surface, he appeared cooperative, even helpful. He answered all their questions and even participated in a few of the early searches. But something about his behavior didn't sit right. It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. He didn't ask many questions about where Emma could be. He didn't seem panicked or driven to find her. He appeared, more than anything else, tired. Meanwhile, Emma's friends began coming forward with more information. One revealed that Emma had recently confided in her about the marriage. She said Emma felt trapped, that Nathan had become controlling over the past year. He monitored her spending, questioned her about where she went after work, and had grown colder, quieter, more distant. Another friend said Emma had been looking for apartments in nearby towns, hoping to move out soon. She hadn't told Nathan, yet. She was scared of how he might react. At this point, detectives began searching for other possible explanations for the strange message. Could Emma have planned her disappearance? Was it possible she staged her own exit to escape Nathan? They examined her bank accounts. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, she had made several small withdrawals, $300 here, $500 there, amounting to a total of $5,000. It was enough to suggest she might have been preparing to leave. But all of the withdrawals had been made from branches close to home, and there was no evidence of travel arrangements, hotel bookings, or bus tickets. Her passport hadn't been used. Her driver's license was still at home. They checked local bus stations, airports, and hotels for someone matching her description. Nothing turned up. No one remembered seeing her. No security footage captured her. It was as though she had vanished into thin air. As the days passed, the message that first seemed like a small clue became the center of the entire case. It was the only direct communication allegedly from Emma after her disappearance, and it was the only piece of digital evidence tying Nathan to her last known activity. Detectives began to wonder. What if Emma never sent it at all? What if it had been written after she was already gone? They started re-examining Nathan's timeline minute by minute. His commute to work, his alibi, his phone usage, everything. There were inconsistencies, gaps, a 30-minute period where his location couldn't be verified. He claimed he was at a gas station around the time the message was sent, but surveillance footage showed he didn't arrive there until closer to 8 a.m. That left a window, plenty of time for someone to stage a message, dispose of a phone, and clean up. The simple, strange message, just 13 words long, had initially seemed like a small, final act of communication. But now, it was taking on a more sinister meaning. It wasn't just a message. It was a signal. A mask. Something designed to create space between suspicion and truth. And the more detectives studied it, the more they were convinced that Emma Caldwell never wrote that text. As the investigation gained momentum, detectives turned their focus to Emma Caldwell's recent behaviors, looking for anything that might offer insight into her state of mind. They began piecing together her last known days, hour by hour, hoping that somewhere in her routine, a clue might be hiding in plain sight. Emma had always been described as dependable and deliberate. She worked weekdays at the Brooksville Elementary School library and often stayed late to help children with reading or to plan upcoming book fairs. Her colleagues remembered her fondly as the kind of person who never raised her voice, who always carried herself with calm professionalism, and who made even the most anxious children feel safe. But beneath her composed exterior, Emma had been quietly preparing for a major change, one she hadn't yet shared with many people. 2 weeks before her disappearance, she had contacted a divorce attorney in the neighboring town of Kingswell. Records showed that she had scheduled a consultation, which she later attended alone. During the meeting, she requested information about her rights regarding shared property and personal safety. The attorney noted that Emma appeared nervous but determined. She didn't disclose any incidents of violence, but she did express concern that her husband, Nathan, would not react well to the news. In the same time frame, Emma had opened a new checking account under her maiden name. Detectives found evidence of this through subpoenaed bank records. The account had been slowly funded with modest transfers from her joint account. Always small amounts, never enough to raise red flags. She was also storing some cash at home, withdrawn in similarly careful amounts from different ATMs around town. Over a matter of weeks, she had amassed roughly $5,000. When investigators searched the house after her disappearance, the cash was nowhere to be found. Her sister confirmed that Emma had mentioned saving money, just in case, though she hadn't gone into detail. The assumption, now growing more likely, was that Emma had planned to leave Nathan. But if that was true, the bigger question became, did Nathan find out? Her browser history revealed additional breadcrumbs. She had visited several apartment rental sites, mostly looking at listings in nearby towns, not far enough to disappear entirely, but far enough to start over. She had also bookmarked a list titled Steps to Leave Safely, which included advice on packing emergency bags, documenting financial records, and informing only a trusted few about relocation plans. There were no emails or messages to suggest. She had told Nathan about her intentions. However, one document stood out. A draft letter titled To Nathan, saved on her computer under a folder marked Private. In it, she had written an emotional but restrained message. She thanked him for their years together, expressed regret over the distance that had grown between them, and explained her need for space and independence. She ended the letter by saying she hoped they could part peacefully. The document had never been printed or emailed. The timestamp showed it was last opened 3 days before her disappearance. At first glance, this seemed to reinforce the possibility that Emma had left voluntarily. But several details didn't support that theory. She had made no bookings, had told no one of a specific destination, and had left behind every piece of identification except her phone. More concerning was that none of her personal items, clothing, toiletries, cherished mementos, were missing. If she had truly walked away from her life, she had done so with nothing but the clothes on her back. Detectives pressed Nathan again, asking whether he had any suspicion that Emma might have been planning to leave. He maintained that he had no idea that their marriage wasn't perfect, but had been steady. He said that Emma was private, and if she was unhappy, she hadn't told him. But his tone was distant, and he gave no indication of sadness or guilt, only frustration that he was being asked the same questions repeatedly. They began interviewing Nathan's co-workers, hoping to get a sense of his behavior before and after Emma went missing. Several described him as quiet and professional, though not especially social. One woman recalled a conversation from 2 weeks earlier where Nathan mentioned that Emma was acting weird lately, and that he thought she was hiding something. He joked that she had a secret plan to run away. At the time, it seemed harmless. Now it was being taken seriously. Meanwhile, a deeper look into Nathan's digital habits uncovered something more troubling. A detective reviewing his laptop found that in the week before Emma vanished, he had searched phrases like how to check someone's private messages, can deleted files be recovered, and how to erase location history from a phone. These searches weren't illegal in themselves, but in context, they painted a concerning picture. They also found an app on his phone that allowed him to send scheduled text messages from another person's device, a tool typically marketed for coordinating posts on social media or handling business replies. But it could also be used to send a message from a phone left behind. The time window between Emma supposedly leaving the house and the strange text being received fit within the time frame needed to use such an app. Forensic specialists began analyzing Emma's laptop more closely. Although she had taken basic precautions to hide her planning, there were still unencrypted files showing printouts of bank statements, receipts for cash withdrawals, and a packing checklist saved in a hidden folder. It was clear she had no intention of vanishing without a trace. She had been trying to do everything right, taking careful steps to protect herself. But something had interrupted those plans. Friends told police that just days before her disappearance, Emma had seemed more anxious than usual. At work, she had dropped a stack of books in the library, something out of character for her, and then excused herself to the bathroom. Her colleague found her there several minutes later, sitting silently on the floor, pale and shaken. When asked what was wrong, Emma had simply said, "I'm fine, just tired." One neighbor mentioned seeing Emma and Nathan in the driveway 2 nights before she vanished. They weren't shouting, but their body language was tense. Emma's arms were folded across her chest, and Nathan appeared to be speaking quickly, gesturing sharply. It lasted only a few minutes before they both went inside. Whatever Emma had been planning, she hadn't had the chance to finish it. The evidence was now pointing to a person who had carefully tried to leave an unhappy situation. Quietly, without drama, but who had disappeared before she could act. She hadn't packed, she hadn't told anyone where she was going, and yet she had prepared herself financially and emotionally for a life without her husband. And somehow, all of that preparation had ended in a single text message that felt less and less like a goodbye, and more like a lie. The search for Emma Caldwell had shifted from hopeful to grim. With each passing day, the silence grew louder. No new sightings, no phone activity, no bank transactions. Emma had vanished, leaving behind a trail of cautious preparation and a single message that investigators increasingly believed she hadn't sent herself. Now detectives were beginning to examine Nathan Caldwell's life with more intensity, digging into his past, his habits, and his whereabouts in the days leading up to Emma's disappearance. Nathan had always maintained the image of a calm, quiet professional. He worked as a project manager at a small construction firm, rarely took time off, and had no prior run-ins with law enforcement. His co-workers described him as polite, punctual, and emotionally reserved, but behind closed doors, according to those closest to Emma, the calmness had cracks. Emma's friends had long sensed a discomfort in her marriage, though she never openly discussed it until recent months. A longtime friend, Melissa, told detectives that Emma had slowly become more withdrawn. She'd started canceling plans, responding to texts less frequently, and always had an excuse when asked to go out on weekends. When Melissa pressed her about it, Emma admitted she was walking on eggshells at home. Nathan wasn't physically abusive, she clarified, but he was controlling, tracking her spending, criticizing her decisions, even commenting on the way she folded laundry. This information reframed the nature of the case. Investigators now believe that Emma had been trying to escape a psychologically controlling relationship. That made her sudden disappearance, on the very week she had consulted a divorce attorney, far more suspicious. The breakthrough came when detectives finally obtained surveillance footage from a camera near a storage facility located just a few miles from the Caldwell's home. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to identify Nathan's car pulling into the lot at 6:40 a.m. on the morning Emma was reported missing. He stayed for exactly 13 minutes before leaving. That put him at the facility just before the message from Emma's phone was sent to his. What made it more alarming was that Nathan had never mentioned going to the storage facility. He had told police he left for work around 6:30 a.m. and stopped at a gas station before heading in. But the gas station timestamp showed he arrived much later. When questioned about this new footage, Nathan seemed rattled. He claimed he went to check on a broken storage lock, something he'd forgotten to mention earlier. But the facility manager confirmed that Nathan had no unit there, and never had. This lie gave police probable cause to secure a search warrant for the facility. With dogs and forensic specialists, they combed through units rented under similar names and addresses. By the end of the day, they found one that had been leased under an alias, E. Caldwell, just 3 weeks earlier. The ID used had been a fake, but the signature matched Nathan's handwriting. Inside the unit was an old armchair, a tarp, a large duffel bag, and several cleaning products. The unit was otherwise empty, except for faint traces of what looked like dried liquid. On the floor, tests later confirmed the presence of blood. It was human, though too degraded for immediate identification. Investigators believed it had been there for days. A closer inspection found hair strands and a small gold earring tucked under the tarp. Claire identified the earring as one Emma often wore, simple, round, and gold-plated, a gift from their mother. The discovery changed everything. It was no longer a missing persons case. It was potentially a homicide investigation. Back at the Caldwell home, a second search was conducted, this time using luminol to detect blood traces that had been cleaned. In the master bathroom, faint patterns lit up around the sink and edge of the tub. Detectives believed a cleanup had taken place. They also found a recently purchased shower curtain in the trash bin outside, still wrapped in plastic. The original curtain was gone. Nathan was brought in again for questioning. This time, he declined to answer most questions and requested a lawyer. His demeanor had changed. He was no longer cooperating fully, no longer volunteering details. He had become cautious, guarded, and distant. Detectives turned their attention to his digital footprint again. They found that on the same day he visited the storage facility, he had searched for how long does DNA last in blood, how to clean up after an accident, and how to throw off a missing persons search. The evidence was circumstantial. But it was building fast, and it was all pointing in the same direction. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of the text message Emma had supposedly sent continued. Experts examined the metadata from the phone's internal logs and determined that the message had been sent manually, not through an automated scheduler or delay app. However, the phone had been unlocked using a passcode at exactly 7:14 a.m., 1 minute before the message was sent. According to Emma's sister, Emma had never shared her phone passcode with anyone. She kept it private, even from close family members. This strongly suggested that whoever sent the message either knew her passcode or had forced it open. Investigators now believed the phone had remained in the house, or very nearby, at the time the message was sent. This supported the theory that Emma had never left for a walk at all. More troubling was the sudden discovery of a deleted audio file recovered from Nathan's phone. The audio was short, just under a minute, but captured a brief, chilling exchange. It wasn't clear when it had been recorded, but a woman's voice believed to be Emma's could be heard in distress. Though muffled, words like, "Please stop," and "Let me go," were distinguishable. Nathan's voice was barely audible, but recognized by tone and phrasing. The clip ended abruptly, with a loud thud. It had been deleted 2 days before the police were called. This audio file became the turning point in the case. The district attorney's office began preparing for the possibility of charges, even though Emma's body had not yet been found. Prosecutors began building a timeline: Emma's financial planning, the alias rented storage unit, the message she likely didn't send, and Nathan's digital and physical movements. The more they uncovered, the more it became clear. Emma Caldwell had been preparing to leave a life of quiet fear. But something, or someone, had stopped her before she could escape. And the one person who claimed to love her most had now become the prime suspect in her disappearance. The investigation had reached a critical stage, with mounting evidence against Nathan Caldwell. The task force was now working under the assumption that Emma was no longer alive. But without a body, charges could be difficult to pursue. They needed more evidence, more clarity, and most of all, a definitive link between Emma's disappearance and Nathan's actions. The forensic team continued processing the storage unit, where faint traces of blood had already been found. Specialists sprayed luminol across the floor and walls, revealing a disturbing pattern. Broad, sweeping streaks consistent with the use of a mop or cloth to clean up a significant spill. Tests confirmed the blood was human. Further analysis linked the hair strands found under the tarp to Emma through mitochondrial DNA. This alone didn't prove a homicide, but it placed Emma at the scene, injured or worse, despite Nathan's insistence that he had no connection to the unit. The tarp itself was sent to a laboratory for more detailed testing. Blood residue embedded in its folds was matched to Emma's blood type, and a partial fingerprint lifted from the corner belonged to Nathan. Still, the evidence was largely circumstantial, strong, but lacking a final, undeniable piece that could confirm foul play and solidify intent. Investigators decided to reconstruct Nathan's movements using GPS data. They requested access to his car's navigation system, which logged destinations and routes. While Nathan had cleared the recent history, a cached record from the vehicle's onboard system still held a location ping from the morning Emma disappeared. It matched the coordinates of a remote wooded area about 25 miles north of Brooksville, off the grid, with no camera coverage, and far from any populated roads. This discovery prompted a full-scale search. Teams of officers, cadaver, dogs and drones were deployed to canvass the heavily forested region. For 2 full days, they found nothing, just dense underbrush, fallen trees, and miles of difficult terrain. But on the third day, one of the dogs alerted at a shallow depression in the ground, partially covered with leaves and broken branches. Inside, the hastily concealed hole, searchers found a large black plastic bag sealed tightly with duct tape. When opened, it revealed a set of clothing, including a pair of jeans, sneakers, and a gray hoodie, each piece confirmed by Emma's sister to be items she had worn often. A floral scarf tied into a loose knot was wrapped around the hoodie. All was stained with dark patches. Tests revealed not only Emma's blood, but traces of soil matching the area around the hole. A forensics expert concluded the clothing had been worn during a traumatic injury. Though no body was found at the site, the presence of these items, combined with the volume of blood, strongly indicated Emma had been seriously harmed, possibly fatally. The discovery added to the growing mountain of circumstantial evidence. But there was one more lead that would take the case in an even darker direction. While examining Nathan's computer again, a technician stumbled across a hidden folder buried deep within his hard drive. It was encrypted, but with the help of digital forensic experts, it was eventually unlocked. Inside were a series of files, journal-style entries written over several months. The language was chilling. Nathan wrote about feeling emasculated, about Emma turning cold, and about being made a fool of in his own home. He wrote about the fear of her leaving, about losing control, and most disturbingly, about having to make her understand one way or another. One entry, dated just 4 days before Emma's disappearance, read, "She thinks she's already gone, but she isn't. She doesn't get to walk away like I'm nothing. If she wants silence, I'll show her what silence looks like." It wasn't a confession, but it was enough to give investigators confidence that Nathan had been harboring resentment and planning something far more sinister than he'd admitted. They secured an arrest warrant and took him into custody for obstruction, unlawful disposal of evidence, and suspicion of murder. Nathan's arrest sent shockwaves through the quiet Brooksville community. Local news outlets covered every development, and the case sparked widespread conversations about emotional abuse and hidden domestic turmoil. Many who had once seen Nathan as a mild-mannered professional now viewed him with fear and disgust. In custody, Nathan remained silent. He refused to answer questions and showed no visible emotion during the interrogations. His attorney filed a motion to suppress several pieces of evidence, claiming illegal search procedures. But the court allowed most of the evidence to stand. Still, without Emma's body, the prosecution hesitated to pursue a full murder charge. They needed something irrefutable, something that could close the loop. That's when detectives received an unexpected call from a waste management company on the outskirts of Brooksville. A worker had remembered seeing a large rolled-up carpet dumped illegally in a wooded area behind their facility roughly 3 weeks earlier. At the time, it had seemed strange, but not necessarily suspicious. When the worker saw Nathan's face in the news, he made the connection and contacted police. Detectives visited the location and found the carpet, partially buried under brush and debris. Inside was what they'd feared: heavily decomposed human remains. The body had been wrapped tightly, and the decomposition made visual identification impossible. However, the forensic team recovered dental records and a fragment of a gold necklace that Emma's sister later confirmed Emma had worn daily. DNA confirmed the remains belonged to Emma Caldwell. The medical examiner's report concluded she had suffered blunt force trauma to the head and signs of strangulation. The manner of death was officially ruled a homicide. Alongside the necklace and clothing, fragments of the same duct tape used in the storage unit were found, further linking the crime scene to Nathan. With this final discovery, the case against him became airtight. The district attorney moved forward with a formal murder charge.
Nathan was indicted on multiple counts, including first-degree murder, unlawful disposal of human remains, obstruction of justice, and evidence tampering. Prosecutors announced they would seek the maximum sentence allowable by law. The community
of Brooksville mourned the loss of Emma, remembered by many as kind, gentle, and generous with her time. Vigils were held in her honor, and friends gathered to speak about the woman who had tried so hard to leave quietly, only to meet a violent end. Though justice was now within reach, the cost had been unbearable. Emma had made careful plans to escape. She had taken the right steps. But control, when threatened, can become deadly. And her attempt at freedom had triggered the very danger she had feared all along. And all it took was one bizarre text to begin unraveling the truth. Nathan Caldwell became the most closely followed case in the state. Every news outlet, every social media feed, and every true crime podcast had something to say about the man whose calm exterior had concealed a storm of resentment and control. Public fascination grew not only because of the crime itself, but also because of how it unfolded, meticulously, chillingly, and tragically. As the prosecution prepared its case, their task was clear: to paint a full and convincing picture of a man who had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal a calculated murder. Though they now had Emma Caldwell's remains, the evidence still leaned heavily on digital traces, surveillance footage, and forensic findings. Without a clear witness or confession, the prosecution knew they needed to create a narrative that showed a pattern of behavior, motive, and opportunity, all pointing directly to Nathan. They began with motive. Emma had been preparing to leave Nathan. Her recent consultation with a divorce attorney, the quiet withdrawal of money into a separate account, and her efforts to regain control of her life painted the image of a woman on the brink of escape. And for Nathan, that was unacceptable. The prosecution argued that he viewed Emma's independence not only as rejection, but as a personal betrayal, a loss of control he couldn't tolerate. The entries found on Nathan's hidden folder were presented as key evidence. The jury heard excerpts from his digital journal, revealing months of growing paranoia, bitterness, and thinly veiled rage. He had described Emma as ungrateful, distant, and even used the phrase, "living like a ghost in my own house." The entry dated 4 days before her death, mentioning silence, was emphasized. Prosecutors claimed this language reflected an emotional build-up toward violence, not just emotional distress. Then came the timeline. The morning Emma disappeared, Nathan had told police he left for work at 6:30 a.m., but GPS records, surveillance footage, and his own digital footprint told a different story. His car had stopped at a remote storage facility at 6:40 a.m., a place he failed to mention in his original statement. The unit, rented under a fake name but matched to his handwriting and linked by his fingerprint, had cleaning supplies, a tarp with Emma's blood on it, and strands of her hair. The phone message, Emma's last known communication, was shown to have been sent minutes after Nathan visited the unit. The device itself had remained close to home all morning, never connecting to a new cell tower. Experts testified that the text was likely sent by someone who had access to her unlocked phone. Given that Emma never shared her passcode, this heavily implied that someone else, most likely Nathan, had used her phone that morning to create the illusion she had gone for a walk. The carpet that had been found near the waste site, the one containing Emma's body, became the trial's most powerful piece of physical evidence. The jury was shown photos of the burial site and heard the medical examiner's findings. Emma had suffered blunt force trauma and likely been strangled. Her body had been rolled in a carpet, sealed in plastic, and dumped far from any trail, showing clear intent to hide what had happened. Duct tape found on the body matched the kind found in the storage unit. To further tie the evidence together, prosecutors presented Nathan's online search history from the weeks leading up to Emma's death. Search terms included, how long, does DNA last on fabric, how to get rid of evidence, how to fake a missing person case, and how police find hidden bodies. These searches had been deleted from his browser but recovered from backups on his hard drive. The defense, in turn, faced an uphill battle. With no direct confession from Nathan and no witnesses to the crime, they aimed to sow doubt in the jury's mind. They questioned the reliability of digital evidence and suggested that someone else could have harmed Emma, an unknown third party who knew about the couple's strained relationship and exploited the situation. They painted Nathan as a broken man, emotionally unstable perhaps, but not a killer. They tried to downplay the digital journal entries as dark thoughts from a man suffering a breakdown, not premeditated planning. They questioned the accuracy of the GPS tracking and the storage facility evidence, suggesting that the unit could have been accessed by someone else. But each argument was systematically dismantled by the prosecution. Nathan's fingerprint, his handwriting, and his search history all pointed back to one person. The most damning blow came from a forensic audio specialist who analyzed the short audio clip found on Nathan's phone. Though muffled, the expert confirmed the presence of Emma's voice, frightened and pleading. The thud that followed aligned with a fall or violent impact. The file had been deleted the day before Nathan contacted police. To the jury, it sounded like a moment of violence Nathan had tried to erase forever. In the courtroom, Emma's family sat quietly each day. Her sister, Claire, often held a photo of Emma folded into her hands. During the closing statements, the prosecution reminded the jury that Emma had tried to leave quietly and safely, that she had done everything she could to move on with her life without confrontation. But she had been stopped by a man who could not accept that loss. The jury deliberated for 3 days. On the afternoon of the 3rd, they returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts. Nathan Caldwell was convicted of first-degree murder, unlawful disposal of a body, obstruction of justice, and tampering with evidence. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In his statement, the judge described the crime as one rooted in control, manipulation, and cruelty. He called Nathan's actions calculated and heartless, and expressed sorrow that Emma's attempt at independence had cost her life. The town of Brooksville tried to heal in the aftermath. A memorial was held at a local park where Emma often walked. Friends and family spoke of her kindness, her love for animals, and her dream of becoming a counselor to help others in troubled relationships. In her honor, a local shelter set up a fund to support domestic abuse survivors, using her story as a reminder of how emotional abuse, often invisible, can turn deadly when ignored. Though justice had been served, the question that remained haunted many. How long had Emma been living in fear? And why had no one seen the danger coming sooner? The signs had been subtle: withdrawn behavior, vague excuses, tension that only those closest to her had sensed. But now, in retrospect, those signs screamed for attention. Emma's story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of hidden abuse and the lengths to which control can escalate when challenged, and all it took to unravel it was a single, out-of-place text that led detectives down a path no one could have predicted. The aftermath of the trial left a lasting mark not only on Emma Caldwell's family, but on the entire town of Brooksville. In the weeks following Nathan's conviction, the media coverage slowly began to fade, but the emotional weight of the tragedy lingered like a heavy fog. For those who knew Emma, the reality of her absence was just beginning to settle in. Her sister Claire struggled with sleepless nights, replaying conversations and overlooked signs, wondering if she could have done something, anything to change the outcome. Claire became the default voice for the family. She answered reporters' questions, coordinated the memorial efforts, and spoke at gatherings. But privately, she was unraveling. The trial had brought some answers, but it didn't erase the pain. What troubled her most was the thought that Emma had kept everything inside until the very end. There had been no final phone call, no cry for help. Just a quiet retreat from a life she had hoped to escape. And when she tried, she paid for it with her life. The investigation into Nathan's life didn't stop with his conviction. Detectives continued to comb through his devices, personal journals, and past behaviors. What they found painted a deeper portrait of a man who had spent years crafting a facade of control and charm while quietly unraveling behind the scenes. Co-workers described him as distant in the final months before Emma's disappearance. Some had noticed a growing irritability, a hair-trigger temper, that he tried to mask with strained politeness. But no one had thought it serious enough to report or confront. Further analysis of Nathan's hard drive revealed deleted emails to an anonymous account, never sent, filled with confessions and disturbing fantasies. In one draft, he wrote about how Emma deserved to understand what fear felt like. Another detailed scenarios in which he would disappear, change his name, and start over somewhere far away. Investigators believed these unsent messages were part of a twisted inner monologue, a diary of thoughts he couldn't say aloud, but needed to release somewhere. These findings reignited discussions about mental health and domestic abuse. Experts were brought in to comment on the case, many pointing out how emotional abuse often lacks physical evidence and is easy to hide. Nathan had no prior arrests, no documented history of violence, and had never been reported for domestic issues. But behind closed doors, he had been isolating Emma, controlling her finances, and undermining her confidence. Textbook signs of coercive control. Emma's friends, looking back, recalled subtle moments that now stood out in sharp contrast. She would cancel plans last minute, avoid talking about her relationship, and sometimes go silent for days. When asked, she'd say everything was fine, just busy or tired. The truth was far more sinister. Nathan had begun monitoring her messages, dictating who she could speak to, and often guilt-tripping her for spending time away from home. One of her co-workers from the animal shelter, Marlene, came forward after the trial to share a letter Emma had once written but never sent. It had been tucked inside a drawer at the shelter, folded and forgotten. In it, Emma wrote about feeling trapped, about wanting to leave but being afraid of what Nathan might do. She wrote, "If something happens, to me, please don't believe it was an accident. I've tried to leave before. He always finds a way to stop me." This letter was dated 2 months before her disappearance. The letter didn't surface in time to be used in court, but it confirmed what everyone now knew. Emma had seen the danger coming. She had tried to protect herself in the only way she knew how, and when that failed, she left behind a quiet warning. Brooksville responded by organizing community education efforts on domestic abuse. The town library hosted seminars. A local women's shelter saw a spike in calls and visits. Claire, though still mourning, became a reluctant advocate. She began speaking at events, sharing Emma's story not to revisit the horror but to help. Others recognized signs before it's too late. Despite the wave of support, not everyone in town found it easy to move forward. Some residents had known Nathan for years, gone to school with him, worked with him, shared dinners and conversations. The disconnect between the man they knew and the man who committed such a calculated crime left them disoriented. They questioned how someone could seem so normal while planning something so brutal. Emma's funeral had been held shortly after the trial ended. It was quiet, attended by close friends and family, with a few townspeople standing at a distance. Claire read a short eulogy, speaking of Emma's quiet strength and how she had always cared more for others than herself. A small garden was planted in her memory at the shelter where she worked. A plaque read, "In loving memory of Emma Caldwell, may your light guide others out of the darkness." The story of Emma Caldwell and Nathan Caldwell would eventually make national headlines again, not because of new evidence, but because her case was chosen as the focus of a true crime documentary. The production team retraced the investigation, interviewed detectives, neighbors, and experts, and examined how such a tragedy could happen in plain sight. The documentary emphasized not just the crime, but the systems and silences that allowed it to go unnoticed for so long. In one particularly haunting segment, the narrator read Emma's unsent letter over footage of her garden, now blooming with spring flowers. The scene struck a chord with viewers around the country, and soon after the episode aired, a national domestic abuse hotline reported a 38% increase in calls. Her story, painful as it was, had become a call to action. Nathan, now serving a life sentence, remained silent in prison. He had never confessed, never shown remorse, and never asked for leniency. Those who had known him still struggled to reconcile his image with the monster described in court. His name became a cautionary tale, a reminder that evil doesn't always look the part. Claire visited Emma's garden often. Sometimes she brought flowers, sometimes she just sat in silence. She would trace her fingers along the plaque and think about the sister she lost. In moments of peace, she believed Emma's story had saved lives. But on harder days, she still replayed the text message, the one that started it all. That simple, chilling sentence. "Gone for a walk. Don't wait up." It had seemed ordinary, but it wasn't. It was a message crafted not by Emma, but by her killer, an effort to delay discovery, to buy time, to hide a brutal truth. And it almost worked. If not for a few inconsistencies, a suspicious mind, and the persistence of investigators, who refused to give up, Emma's story might have remained another unresolved missing persons case. Instead, it became something more, a devastating reminder that danger can wear a familiar face, and that silence, when left unchallenged, can be deadly. The days turned into weeks, and life in Brooksville began to settle into a strange rhythm. The trial was over. Nathan Caldwell was behind bars, and Emma Caldwell had finally been laid to rest. But while the official story had reached its conclusion, there were still pieces of the puzzle that didn't sit right with some people. Fragments of doubt, small threads of mystery that refused to be tied off. Detective Lauren Price, who had been one of the key investigators on the case, found herself haunted by the details even after the conviction. She had solved many cases in her career, but this one stayed with her. There was something about the planning, the precision, and the absence of any emotional outburst that bothered her. Nathan hadn't just snapped. His crime had been orchestrated down to the minute. And yet, there were gaps in his digital footprint, hours that couldn't be fully accounted for, and objects, like Emma's wedding ring and cell phone, that were never recovered. Most people would have considered the case closed, but Lauren couldn't help feeling there was something more. She began reviewing the files again in her free time, going back over evidence that had seemed less important during the trial. One thing that stood out was a transaction made with Nathan's credit card just hours after Emma's disappearance was reported. It was a small purchase, a few items from a hardware store, but the receipt listed something unusual: a prepaid phone. During the original investigation, it was assumed Nathan had purchased the phone to throw off investigators or prepare for a potential escape. But no phone had ever been found. Lauren started wondering if someone else had been in contact with Nathan during that time, someone who might have helped cover his tracks or knew more than they had admitted. She pulled security footage from the hardware store and examined it closely. The man making the purchase did appear to be Nathan, but something was off. His movements were stiffer than usual, his head down, his gait slightly different. Facial recognition software gave a 60% match, far from certain. It opened up the possibility that Nathan may not have made the purchase himself. Digging deeper, Lauren discovered another anomaly. A surveillance camera from a gas station 5 miles away captured a vehicle that resembled Nathan's SUV parked by a side alley on the night Emma disappeared. The vehicle was turned off for nearly an hour, then pulled away. No license plate was visible, and the driver's face couldn't be seen, but the timestamp coincided with the time window when Nathan claimed to be at home asleep. When the GPS tracker data from his car was reviewed again, it showed a loss of signal during that same time frame, something originally dismissed as a glitch. Curiosity piqued. Lauren began looking at Nathan's old phone records, not just from around the time of the murder, but stretching back months. In doing so, she found a number that appeared repeatedly, especially late at night. It was unregistered and prepaid, bouncing off different cell towers with no consistent pattern. She traced it back to a burner phone purchased 6 months before Emma's death. Its last known ping was from a tower near the old train yard, an area long abandoned and rarely visited. On a hunch, Lauren paid a visit to the site. What she found shocked her. Hidden in the rubble of a collapsed warehouse was a rusted-out locker, its door slightly ajar. Inside were items that had clearly been there for months: discarded clothes, empty water bottles, and a canvas bag containing a cell phone and a flash drive. The phone was dead, but the flash drive worked. What it held would change everything. The flash drive contained audio recordings, emails, and a set of instructions. The recordings were muffled, but one was unmistakably Nathan's voice, speaking to someone in hushed tones. He mentioned Emma by name. He spoke about her wanting to leave, about how it couldn't happen like this. In another recording, a second voice, unidentified, responded calmly, even coldly, suggesting they handle it quietly. The emails were drafts, never sent but carefully written. One read like a list: GPS jammer, prepaid SIM, gloves, trash bags, tarp. Another mentioned a date, 2 weeks before Emma's disappearance, and the line, "She won't be a problem after that." Lauren knew she had stumbled onto something massive. It now seemed likely that Nathan hadn't acted alone. Someone else had been involved. Someone who helped orchestrate parts of the crime, or at the very least knew about it in advance. But who? The answer came sooner than expected. Fingerprint analysis on the flash drive yielded a partial match to a man named Dylan Voss, a former co-worker of Nathan's from years ago. Dylan had worked at the same firm briefly, but had left under strange circumstances. His record was spotty: small-time fraud, a dismissed assault charge, and a reputation for shady dealings. Investigators found that Dylan had moved out of state shortly after Emma's disappearance, He had left no forwarding address and had been living under the radar, using fake names and cash jobs. Lauren alerted federal authorities, and a nationwide warrant was issued for his arrest. A week later, Dylan was apprehended in a small town in Arizona, working as a mechanic under a false identity. When questioned, Dylan initially denied everything, but faced with the recordings and emails, he cracked. He admitted that Nathan had approached him months before the murder, asking for help, handling a personal issue. Dylan said he didn't know exactly what Nathan was planning at first, but eventually realized it involved his wife. He claimed he never participated in the murder itself, but helped Nathan plan logistics, buying burner phones, renting the storage unit under a fake name, and researching ways to dispose of a body. Dylan's confession added a new layer to the case. It explained inconsistencies in Nathan's alibi and actions, and it revealed just how premeditated the crime had been. Nathan hadn't simply lost control in a moment of rage. He had built a plan over months, consulted another person, and executed it step by step, right down to staging a fake text and hiding the body with chilling precision. The revelation reignited public outrage. People had believed the story was over, but now it was clear that more had been hidden than anyone imagined. Dylan was charged as an accessory to murder, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. His trial was scheduled to begin the following year, and prosecutors planned to push for the maximum sentence. For Claire and the Caldwell family, the news reopened old wounds. The idea that someone else had known what was happening and did nothing to stop it was almost too much to bear. Claire felt the betrayal all over again, this time not just by Nathan, but by the silence of another who had chosen self-preservation over human decency. Emma's story, once thought to be complete, had taken another turn. The mystery that had started with one strange text message continued to unravel, revealing the horrifying complexity of a crime that was far from impulsive. It was a plan, a partnership, and perhaps, even more unsettling, a possibility that others still hadn't come to light. And so the search for truth continued, one thread leading to another, long after the case had supposedly been closed. News of Dylan Voss's involvement in Emma Caldwell's murder spread quickly, rekindling national interest in the case. Reporters returned to Brooksville, documentaries were updated with new footage, and online forums lit up with speculation. The idea that Nathan Caldwell hadn't acted alone, that someone else had not only known of the crime but helped facilitate it, shocked even the most hardened followers of the case. And yet, for investigators like Detective Lauren Price, the discovery brought more questions than answers. After Dylan's confession, law enforcement began to re-examine every aspect of Nathan's life. They looked into his financial records, travel history, and digital communications with renewed scrutiny. One detail caught their attention: a series of cash withdrawals leading up to Emma's disappearance, each made from a different ATM and all carefully spaced out over several weeks. The total sum was nearly $10,000, enough to raise suspicion. Investigators theorized that this money had been set aside to pay Dylan for his involvement, or worse, to finance more sinister steps that never came to light. What concerned Lauren most was the timeline Dylan provided. According to his account, Nathan had first contacted him nearly a year before Emma vanished. That was months before Emma had even expressed a desire to leave her marriage publicly. If Dylan was telling the truth, it meant Nathan had been contemplating murder long before Emma realized she was in danger. It wasn't a last-minute decision. It was premeditation in its most calculated form. This revelation deeply unsettled Claire Caldwell. She had already spent months trying to make sense of her sister's final days, haunted by the signs she'd missed. Learning that Emma's fate may have been sealed nearly a year in advance shattered what little peace she had managed to build. The guilt returned, sharper than before. Claire began reviewing old texts, photos, and voicemails from Emma, searching for anything at all, that might hint at what she was going through. Meanwhile, Dylan's arrest spurred another investigation, this time into whether there were more people involved. Detectives discovered that he had used a private email server registered under a fake business name, Vanguard Consulting Services. Through it, he had exchanged several encrypted messages with someone using the alias R. Franklin. The contents of these emails were initially unreadable, but forensic analysts worked tirelessly to break the encryption. When they succeeded, what they found turned everything on its head. The emails between Dylan and R. Franklin were not just casual discussions. They were filled with precise instructions and veiled references to tasks, payments, and potential contingencies. One message in particular stood out. It was dated a week before Emma's disappearance and included the phrase, "Confirming final timeline. Item to be moved Sunday night. Ensure no digital residue. Full silence protocol." The tone was corporate, clinical, and chilling. It suggested not just collusion but structure, a methodical plan executed with military-like efficiency. The discovery of R. Franklin led investigators into yet another rabbit hole. They traced the alias to a series of burner phones and fake IDs, none of which yielded a definitive identity. But a breakthrough came when an IP address used to send one of the messages was traced to a local co-working space 2 towns over. Surveillance. Footage from that day showed a man in his 40s entering the building, staying for just over an hour, and leaving without interacting with anyone. He wore a baseball cap and sunglasses, but facial recognition software returned a match. His name was Raymond Franklin, an IT consultant with a clean record, no connection to Nathan Caldwell on the surface, and no known ties to Dylan Voss. But, as the investigation dug deeper, a web began to form. Raymond had previously worked with Nathan on a short-term project years earlier, and had once been investigated for fraud involving falsified digital records. The charges had been dropped due to lack of evidence, but it suggested a pattern. Raymond was brought in for questioning. He denied everything, insisting he had no knowledge of Emma, Nathan, or Dylan. He claimed he had never used a co-working space in that area and had no idea how his identity could be linked to any alias. But the digital trail was too strong. Metadata from the encrypted emails showed timestamps that aligned with gaps in Raymond's work calendar, and digital fingerprints matched his home computer. It was enough to charge him with obstruction and conspiracy. The public was stunned. What had originally been seen as a tragic case of domestic violence was now being revealed as something far more complex. A conspiracy involving at least 3 people, one of whom had remained completely invisible until now. The narrative shifted. People no longer spoke of Nathan Caldwell as a solitary villain. Instead, he was seen as the face of something bigger, more calculated, and far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The revelations sparked widespread outrage. Victims' rights groups called for stronger laws around digital surveillance and coercive control. Lawmakers proposed new legislation aimed at tightening restrictions on untraceable phone purchases and encrypted communication services. The Caldwell case was no longer just a true crime story. It was a catalyst for systemic change. Back in Brooksville, the town felt a renewed sense of unease. Residents who had once thought the nightmare was over now realized they had only seen the tip of the iceberg. Parents talked more openly with their children about safety. Couples reevaluated their relationships, and a lingering fear settled in. The fear that evil could look like anyone, and that darkness could stretch further than they had ever thought possible. Claire tried to stay strong through it all. She continued to speak out, attending conferences and interviews, determined to keep Emma's memory alive. But privately, she struggled with the weight of knowing her sister had been caught in something so much larger than they had ever understood. She wondered how many more people were out there. How many had played even the smallest part in what happened to Emma? As the next trial approached, this time for Dylan Voss and Raymond Franklin, prosecutors prepared to present a case that would expose the full scope of the operation. Witnesses were called, evidence organized, and experts brought in to explain how such a conspiracy could remain hidden in plain sight. The courtroom was expected to be packed once again, not just with reporters and the curious, but with survivors of abuse, advocates, and people who had followed Emma's story from the very beginning. And still, questions remained. Who had really sent that final text from Emma's phone? Had Dylan or Raymond been present the night she was killed? Were there others, still unknown, who had helped cover up the crime? Detective Lauren Price wasn't finished. Despite the arrests and the mounting evidence, she couldn't shake the feeling that one piece of the puzzle was still missing. One detail, one name, one final thread that would reveal the full truth behind what had really happened to Emma Caldwell. As the days leading up to the trial for Dylan Voss and Raymond Franklin drew closer, the town of Brooksville found itself grappling with a new reality, one where justice, while still not fully realized, had become increasingly complicated. The truth about Emma Caldwell's murder had evolved far beyond what anyone could have anticipated, and with each new piece of evidence that came to light, the scope of the conspiracy grew larger, more chilling. Claire Caldwell, still reeling from the discovery that more people were involved in her sister's death, was finding it harder to process everything. She had hoped, after Nathan's conviction, that the case would finally come to an end, that the nightmare would be over. Instead, the more she learned, the deeper the pit in her stomach became. Each revelation felt like another layer of betrayal, another unwelcome chapter in a story that had started with a single, seemingly innocent text message. As the trial began, the courtroom was packed. Media outlets, true crime enthusiasts, and victims' rights groups all attended, hoping to see justice served. But there was an unmistakable tension in the air, an undercurrent of disbelief that this was happening in a small town like Brooksville. This wasn't just a domestic violence case anymore. It was a far-reaching conspiracy, one that had involved multiple people, hidden agendas, and enough manipulation to make even the most seasoned investigators question how it had all gone unnoticed. For so long, prosecutors had their work cut out for them. They had to connect the dots between Nathan, Dylan, Raymond, and the mysterious figures who had helped orchestrate the crime. The evidence was overwhelming, but there was still one major hurdle, proving that the conspiracy was a coordinated effort, not just the work of 3 individuals who had acted independently. They needed to tie Raymond Franklin directly to the murder, something that had yet to be fully established. Despite his connections to Nathan and Dylan, no one had found clear evidence that he had participated in the crime itself. On the first day of the trial, the defense attorneys did their best to cast doubt on the prosecution's narrative. They argued that while Dylan and Raymond had been involved in some way, the evidence didn't conclusively prove that they had played an active role in Emma's murder. They suggested that Nathan had acted alone, that the conspiracy was simply a series of coincidences. But with each piece of new evidence, the defense's argument seemed weaker. The burner phones, the encrypted emails, the payments made to Dylan, each piece told a story of meticulous planning, of actions taken long before Emma's tragic end. The courtroom was captivated by the testimony of Detective Lauren Price, who laid out the timeline of events with methodical precision. She explained the key pieces of evidence, the encrypted emails between Dylan and Raymond, the digital trail that had led them to the co-working space, and the critical role that the burner phone had played in the conspiracy. But it was the flash drive that had been found in the abandoned warehouse, containing the recordings of Nathan's voice and the chilling instructions about Emma, that truly grabbed everyone's attention. The images and audio were played for the jury, and the weight of the evidence was undeniable. As the trial continued, Claire couldn't help but feel the weight of every moment. She sat in the courtroom each day, listening to the details that had been kept from her for so long. It was difficult to sit through the testimony, knowing that every revelation about Emma's life and death was pulling her further into a web of lies and deceit that had been spun by people she had once considered strangers. The thought that someone like Raymond Franklin, who had seemed so ordinary, could have been involved in something so monstrous was incomprehensible. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling session of testimony, Claire stepped outside the courthouse to clear her mind. She needed a moment of silence, away from the whispers and the crowds, to try and make sense of it all. As she stood alone in the parking lot, staring at the gray sky, a woman approached her. A familiar face, one she hadn't seen in years. It was Emma's old friend Rachel, who had moved to a different town shortly after Emma's marriage. She had come back for the trial, just as she had promised Emma when they had last spoken. Rachel had stayed in touch with Emma over the years, but like many of Emma's friends, had drifted away when Nathan's possessiveness began to isolate her. Still, Rachel had always been a part of Emma's life, and Claire knew there was more to her story than she had shared. "I couldn't stay away," Rachel said softly, her voice filled with regret. "I should have been there for her." Claire nodded, unsure of how to respond. She had been so focused on the legal aspects of the case, on the evidence and the trial, that she hadn't had the emotional space to consider how much it had affected those who had known Emma best. "I don't understand any of this," Claire whispered. "How could this happen? How did we miss it?" Rachel looked at Claire with tears in her eyes. "You didn't miss it," she said quietly. "You couldn't have known. Emma was so careful, so quiet about everything. She didn't want anyone to see, but she was scared. She was so scared." Rachel told Claire about the conversations she had had with Emma in the months before her disappearance. Emma had confessed her fears, her concerns about Nathan's behavior, but had always insisted that she could handle it. She had never spoken directly about the abuse, but the more Rachel thought about it, the more she realized that Emma had been trying to warn her in the only way she knew how. "She was trying to leave," Rachel said, her voice cracking. "She didn't want to die like this. She wanted out, but Nathan made sure she couldn't escape. He made her feel like she had no choice." The words hit Claire like a ton of bricks. Emma had been planning to leave. Emma had tried, in the quietest ways possible, to escape. And in the end, it was Nathan's control, his twisted influence, that had ultimately sealed her fate. As the trial continued, the case began to take unexpected turns. New witnesses came forward, each offering more insight into Nathan's behavior. People who had worked with him, who had been in his life, slowly pieced together the fragments of his personality, the dark side that had lurked beneath the surface, the jealousy, the paranoia, the possessiveness. It was clear that Nathan had orchestrated his wife's death not as a spur-of-the-moment crime of passion, but as a cold, calculated act. By the time the closing arguments were made, the courtroom was silent, everyone waiting for the verdict that would finally bring closure to Emma's story. But in the back of her mind, Claire knew that the truth, no matter how fully it was revealed, would never erase the pain of her sister's death. It was a wound that would never fully heal. When the jury returned with their verdict, it was unanimous. Guilty. Dylan Voss and Raymond Franklin were both convicted of their roles in Emma's murder, though their sentences were yet to be determined. Nathan Caldwell's life sentence would stand, as would the lingering question of whether there were others involved, others whose names had yet to be uncovered. For Claire, the verdict was a bittersweet relief. Justice had been served, but at what cost? Emma was gone, and no legal victory could bring her back. Still, Claire vowed to continue her sister's legacy. She would speak out for those who couldn't, just as Emma had wanted. And in the quiet moments, when the world seemed far away, she would remember her sister, not as a victim, but as someone who had fought until the very end. Emma's story had not just changed the course of one family's life. It had changed the way people viewed the subtle, insidious nature of control. It had exposed the dark undercurrent of manipulation and abuse that could be hidden beneath even the most ordinary facades. And in doing so, it had sparked a conversation that would continue long after the trial was over.